Hi Barbie. So one of my longtime goals with this channel has been to eventually start making content about theater. Now, I know what you're thinking. Ryan, why would you do that? We know you for Teen Wolf and Degrassi. Isn't this a little off-brand? I've never really been one to pigeonhole myself. I never want to be boxed into one genre or franchise or anything like that. Because even though from a business perspective, I understand why channels do that, I know in my heart of hearts that it wouldn't be fulfilling to me as a creator. I like a lot of things, and I want my content to reflect that. I don't really consider my brand on YouTube to be Teen Wolf or Degrassi or Pikmin or whatever. My brand is whatever the hell I feel like talking about that day. And today, that thing is theater. For those of you who don't know, maybe you're new here, I am a writer myself. I write primarily for the theater. That's my impression of those horrible, stuffy Brits that are the only people on this platform that talk about theater. The theater. But for real though, theater is my passion, it's my profession, and it's the thing that more than anything I hope to someday make a living doing. As someone who is freshly out of college, I'm working hard to stay engaged in the theater scene now that I'm not in a situation where I'm spending 8 hours a day in forced proximity to it. However, theater is also expensive, probably one of the most expensive art forms to engage with as a consumer. Even off-Broadway theaters can charge upwards of $20 for a ticket. One of the ways I get around this is by volunteering on weekends at theaters here in New York. As volunteer positions often are, it is unpaid work, but it does enable me to see free shows. Many of these are downtown theaters with shows that would normally fly under my radar, so volunteering my time in this way has actually been a real joy. However, if ever I am craving a taste of something a bit more highbrow, maybe a more established work, more often than not I have to track the play down at a bookstore or online and read it myself. And I'm definitely not averse to reading plays. I like to read, I do find it relaxing. With that being said, it is pretty tantamount to watching a movie versus reading the screenplay. There are many things that go into making a play beyond just the script. It's often said that playwrights are to theater what architects are to buildings. We create the blueprints and then hand them off to others to be constructed, decorated, etc. Our job as playwrights is to create a script that is structurally sound and will remain functional across many different productions so that even if it changes shape, it doesn't lose anything in that interpretation. One of the reasons for this is that theater is an inherently collaborative medium. Two different directors will produce the same work very differently, and if their work ends up being bad or doing a disservice to the production or the audience in any way, that's going to reflect poorly on the playwright. People are going to look at the text and place the blame there, even if it was choices the director made that ultimately led to the play's failure. If the house falls apart, it's the architect that takes the blame, not the foreman and his crew. Likewise, if a play fails, the playwright fails alone. This is why the job of the playwright is so important. I, like most people, do appreciate it when a play is well constructed on its own merits. Even if the actors are a bit stiff, or the directing is shoddy, so long as the play itself is good, I'm more than happy to enjoy it on that basis. So while plays are meant to be seen and not read, there is still something to get out of sitting down with a beverage of your choice and engaging with the play as a work of literature. Also, and not to play that I went to school card, but as someone who now has a degree in theater, I do feel qualified to speak on the subject with some authority. Straight plays are actually a very unique and tricky medium with its own rules, wholly distinct from the likes of films or novels, shaped by thousands of years of history and innovation. Theater is one of the oldest art forms in existence, dating all the way back to antiquity. As such, for a student who is learning all of this for the first time, there is a bit more of a learning curve with theater and what constitutes a good, well-constructed play versus a boring, aimless drink of dog water made by a hack with no talent than there is with, say, film. That being said, you can still be a hack who makes dog water plays and still find success, so long as you're able to sell your show to a wide audience. And on that note, so if you've heard the name David Mamet in any context outside of your community college's production of Glengarry Glen Ross, it might be because of this.
We have to take back control. If there's no community control of the schools, what we have is kids being not only indoctrinated, but groomed in a very real sense.
Yeah, we're gonna circle back to this. David Mamet is an American playwright of Ashkenazi Jewish descent. His grandparents were from Poland, and it was in his house growing up where he claims to have honed his ethos as a writer. According to Mamet,
"In my family, in the day prior to television, We like to while away the evenings by making ourselves miserable, based solely on our ability to speak the language viciously. That's probably where my ability was honed.
Indeed, Mamet's plays are characterized by witty dialogue, full of repetitions and fast-paced arguments, a style that was considered to be very innovative back in 1975. Mamet speak, as it has come to be known, was very influential in the theater industry, with much of the 80s and 90s dominated by plays attempting to emulate this style to varying degrees of success. Popular Thing spawns ripoffs, tale as old as time. In recent years, writers like Mamet, as well as his film peers Joss Whedon and Aaron Sorkin, have faced increased scrutiny over their respective styles of writing. It doesn't take a trained eye for someone familiar with these people's work to realize that basically every character is written the exact same way, even across projects. The writing on The West Wing might seem novel until you tune into The Newsroom or Being the Ricardos and realize that Sorkin writes basically every character the same way. Likewise, much of Mamet's new work has been savaged by critics and publications who previously reviewed his work very positively. Even people who still hold his early work like American Buffalo and Speed the Plow in high regard are pulling back the curtain here. And I don't want to say that his whole body of work has been detritus this whole time, although I will heavily imply it. There's definitely been a shift in the quality of Mamet's work, and by shift I do mean decline. From the first scene, this play's most fundamental issues were already on full display. The Penitent is a play in 8 scenes, spread out across a relatively short 53 pages. I found out during my research that apparently the off-Broadway production had a 12-minute intermission, presumably to push the runtime up to 90 minutes and qualify it as a full length. To quote Robert Hofler in his review of the play for The Wrap,
"Have you ever been in a theater where almost no one gets up during the intermission? If you answer yes, chances are you've been to a David Mamet play. He's into writing these 70-minute plays and throwing in an intermission to make people believe he's delivered a full evening in the theater. If only he would also add more characters, plot, substance."
Hofler makes several astute points here. Let's begin with the play's characters, or lack thereof. This play has 4 characters, which is honestly pushing it for Mamet. The main character is Charles, a psychiatrist who has recently returned to his Jewish faith after a troubling session with one of his patients. You also have his wife, Kath, who doesn't love him anymore, as well as 2 attorneys. At the end of the play, we find out that one of these attorneys, Charles's friend Richard, has been fucking his wife behind the scenes. Shit's crazy, y'all. The story has a couple different subplots, ultimately making this play feel a bit unfocused and causing certain plot points to fall by the wayside. Remember that patient that drove Charles to find God? We find out that what was so troubling about him was the fact that he was gay, and it gets worse. After the patient's appointment with Charles, he apparently committed a mass shooting that resulted in the deaths of 10 people, and now he's weaponizing his queerness to brand Charles a homophobe and uses homophobia as the reason for why he ended up doing what he did. Mamet actually shows a bit of restraint here by waiting all the way until page 3 to pull the gay person is victimizing himself to court public opinion card. While all of this is happening, a newspaper has apparently dug up one of Charles's old papers that, according to Charles, was titled "Homosexuality Considered an Adaptation," which was then misreported as "Homosexuality Considered as an Aberration," further substantiating the defense's claims. Right off the bat, there is a very obvious fundamental problem with this alternate reality that Mamet has constructed here, which he purports to be a reflection of the times. That problem, of course, is that in the real world, gay men are not mass shooters. We have the crime data to show that a vast majority of mass shooters are straight white men who exhibit extreme antisocial behavior. There have been gay serial killers in the past. Literally the only one I can think of is Jeffrey Dahmer. But that's not really what we're talking about here. It takes a certain type of psyche for a person to snap and unleash this kind of Homeric violence you see in situations like this. And while I am not an expert on this subject, the data is there to corroborate the idea that, across the board, gay men generally don't fall into this category. We are much more likely to kill ourselves than other people. That's just a fact. So for Mamet to construct a reality where this is not only a thing, but to use it as the basis for a story that is in effect more about ideas than action is very irresponsible. I guess I can't prove Mamet was trying to slander the gay community with this play. If only there was some kind of video evidence where he stated his opinion about us loud and clear.
What we have is kids being not only indoctrinated but groomed.
Oh yeah. Another smaller issue with this premise is that this is the 21st century. The newspapers have been pretty much obsolete for the last 30 years now, and yet here Mamet is trying to convince us that in the year 2017, when this play was, first staged, an easily debunkable misprint in one newspaper is enough to threaten a man's entire career as a psychiatrist. Just another example of Mamet being out of touch with the times. I wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow he took a page out of those Roman statue Twitter accounts and penned an essay about how the death of print media is a sign of the collapse of Western civilization. I mentioned before that the play is spread out across 8 scenes. Each of these scenes is about 6 or 7 pages long. Each features Charles and one of the other 3 characters engaging in prolonged debates with no real aim or direction in sight. None of the characters enjoy each other in any way. It's not humorous in any way. And they're all in full Mamet speak mode, so it's extremely difficult to get invested in their squabbles. It's generally unwise to open a scene in the middle of an argument, especially at the top of a play or right after an intermission. As a viewer, it's not unlike walking into a public space like a lobby or a food court and finding a couple arguing loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. You don't know these people, and even if it's juicy, you don't really care about their fight because you're not invested in their lives in any way. This problem is further exacerbated by the fact that the play itself is very light on plot. Outside of debating each other about whether or not Charles should take the paper to court over their extremely inconsequential misprint, the only real plot developments occur when the court where the gay mass shooter is being tried subpoena Charles's case file, and for some reason he doesn't want to give it to him. There is a reason, but we don't find out until the end of the play, so I'm just not going to tell you. It does, however, completely undermine the entire conflict of the play when you realize, oh, not only were these debates long, they were also pointless and stupid. And given that the play really only consists of the debates, it wouldn't be too much of a leap to say that the entire play is pointless and stupid. When you're writing a play, something very important to keep in mind is that, unlike with something like a movie or a TV show, characters in a play really exist to service the plot. A play is a very expensive piece of real estate, something Mamet has himself written about in the past. So there isn't a lot of space for meandering bullshit like there is in a 22-episode CW show. A play at its core is action. Characters exist not to be, but to act. Have you ever wondered why actors are called actors? Bro, I am sweating. It's because in a play, a character is what they do. All that is to say that the characters in this play don't really do anything. So there is no plot, and it feels like nothing is happening. There is a whole 6-page stretch in the back half of the play where the opposing counsel is interrogating Charles about his religion and how that intersects with his political beliefs. And it's abundantly clear that Charles is little more than a 3/4 life crisis self-insert from Mamet to discuss everything he should be working through in therapy. Like I said, the Mamet speak is on full display here, making the exchanges even more repetitive than they would be if he'd just given up the ghost and tried to write the characters like humans. Instead, the characters are simply conduits for discourse. It's like reading the transcript of a series of one-on-one talks featuring the worst people you've ever met. I mentioned the wife's affair subplot, so it's important to mention that, like the thing with the gay mass shooter's file, we don't find out about the extent of it until the very last scene of the play after the wife checks herself into a mental hospital to cope with all of her friends abandoning her for sticking by her homophobic husband. Fake ass hoes. Maybe, if we'd seen some of these things, we could have had an actual play on our hands. Affairs, lawsuits, disturbing therapy sessions with deadly consequences. These are all things that are oozing with drama. What happens when, instead of showing these things, the writer instead opts to tell us about them after the fact, is that the play ends up robbed of all of its dramatic potential, leaving us with a set of boring, redundant scenes that fail to do the one thing Mamet claims to set out to do with his plays: entertain. The decline in the quality of Mamet's work actually directly correlates with his recent ventures into right-wing politics. In the years since he was last relevant, Mamet has become more and more vocal about his political beliefs. Back in the 70s, he used to jokingly refer to himself as a brain-dead liberal, as outlined in his Village Voice essay, "Why I Am No Longer a Brain-Dead Liberal." He apparently used to listen to a lot of NPR, which he refers to in this essay as National Palestinian Radio. Okay. His whole essay carries the same blasé, yeah, I disagree with you, but that doesn't mean we can't get a beer and shit on brown people together tone that absolutely plagued the 2000s. And ever since, he's only veered further and further to the right, with multiple appearances on the shows of Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin, and Joe Rogan, just to name a few. This, of course, all culminated in his now infamous appearance on Fox News, where he declared, among other things, that
This has always been the problem with education, is that teachers are inclined, particularly men, because men are predators, to pedophilia.
This was in response to the passing of the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida, by the by. Speaking from my own perspective, I see Mamet as being of like the worst breed of Reaganite conservatives, using his platform and wealth to speak out against civil rights, gun control, and social services, and in support of political organizations, including the Trump administration and the State of Israel. He is also a stringent capitalist, espousing a belief in both a meritocratic fantasy of the theater industry, as well as the circular reasoning that the theater industry is how it is because of how it is, and therefore that is how it should be. He has professed his belief in this hyper-capitalist, vertical theater industry that he has found so much success in, where plays exist not to impart messages or ideas, but simply to entertain the masses and make money for their producers. This is all interesting because in his writing, Mamet ardently claims that he doesn't consider political messaging when writing his plays. Ironic, considering the fact that Mamet has made a career creating works that play possum with social issues and whine about how men are the real victims in society, while adding nothing of value to the discourse surrounding these very real social issues. And while people were willing to eat it up back in the 20th century, we are no longer the 20th century, babes. Just as there's been a reevaluation of Mamet's work in recent years for being tired, samey, and across the board boring, there has also been a real reckoning with the politics embedded in many of his plays, including the likes of Oleana and Race. A white man wrote a play called Race. Mamet's theory about plays existing not to explore ideas, but rather to make money would be whatever in a vacuum. However, this is the real world, jackass. No art, especially not conservative art, is ever made in a vacuum, nor is it ever consumed or discussed in a vacuum. In his plays Oleana and Race, Mamet constructs a reality where well-off white men are constantly at risk of being victimized by bad actors who make use of false accusations of sexual assault, racism, and other forms of violence in order to threaten their livelihoods and take what they have for themselves. Through fast-paced dialogue and some well-timed twists, Mamet shields his reactionary rhetoric behind a veil of theatrics. Knowingly or unknowingly, he's essentially grooming his audience to be partial to his worldview by opening them up to the possibility that things like this happen in real life beyond some fringe, easily disprovable outliers.
Welcome to the real world, jackass!
And this is not a blanket condemnation of all plays that challenge social attitudes. I don't believe that plays have to be ideologically pure in order to be good or at least worth engaging with. I actually think that that is a pretty unreasonable expectation to have when engaging with art. What's interesting here is that it's an example of Mamet contradicting himself. He claims not to infuse his work with political messaging, only to write a play about a man having his life destroyed by false allegations of sexual assault and racism in an attempt to extort him of his wealth. There is no reality where that is not a political statement. And to play possum and claim to be apolitical in your art betrays a stunning lack of self-awareness on Mamet's part. Mamet's plays are also characterized by their structure. They are typically comprised of a collection of scenes where two characters we don't care about fight for 10 minutes at a time while moving the plot along at a snail's pace, as we see in The Penitent. This is what I like to call the worst thing in the world. I feel like we've all seen that play that starts in the middle of an argument over a situation you don't have any reason to care about, so you tune out for 10 minutes, and by the time something actually grabs your attention, you've been zoned out for so long that you don't know who anyone is or what's going on. That's basically all that Mamet's plays are, and it's this style that basically ruined the theater industry for about a decade there back in the 90s. Everyone wanted to be the next David Mamet, so there they were with the couple at the table working up to a divorce for 90 minutes, and that's every play that's being produced. And if a play is anything other than that, it better be a musical, otherwise no one's gonna want to finance it. Ever notice how the cutoff for the canon of great American plays is somewhere near the mid-1970s and only really picks up again around the turn of the millennium? Yeah. That's this guy's fault. And if you don't agree with me on this, Maybe you saw a production of sexual perversity in Chicago and it changed your life. I invite you to read a bit more of his work and keep reading until you start to see the cracks. Believe me, once you see, you can't unsee. Mamet's work has always benefited from being divisive. The aforementioned Oleana famously left couples leaving the theater in screaming matches, thereby attracting news headlines about the most outrageous new play of the season, in turn prompting more people to attend the following evening. And while I don't believe that Mamet is faking his political beliefs for capital, I do think it's worth stopping to mention that these controversies have made him a very rich man. There is a reason that everyone wanted to be like this guy in the 90s, and it's not just because they liked his plays so much. As far as art making goes, playwriting is one of the most unstable career paths one can choose to go into. Almost nobody makes a living solely from their work as a playwright. So there you are in the 90s, struggling to pay your bills and make a name for yourself. Every agent you've queried has rejected you, your plays aren't getting produced on a stage large enough to turn a significant profit, and there's David Mamet. Rock star of the theater world, making millions off of the backs of some of the most heavily produced plays of the 20th century. What is there to do but mimic and hope to replicate his success? Even if you don't agree with me that this damaged the theater industry in the long run, you should still take my word that this wave of plays consisting of two-person arguments and subversive takes on social issues ended up producing a glut of detritus that was pretty inescapable during that era. And I am speaking on this subject as a student. Of course, this was all before my time. I learned all of this by studying that era of theater and picking up on the trend, as well as from testimonials from those who were actively working in the New York theater scene during that time. All of this information is out there, but the history of New York's theater scene is paradoxically both extremely vast and extremely localized, so most people just won't dig deep into it unless they're autistic and their special interest is washed up hack playwrights who haven't had a critical success in over 15 years. In case I haven't made it abundantly clear, I am not a big fan of David Mamet. I'd actually go so far as to consider myself a David Mamet hater. I was actually first introduced to Mamet back during my first semester of college. Of his many plays, Oleana was the first that I was ever assigned, and it's been on site ever since. It was actually my turn to present that week because our class was structured rotationally. Picture me, a little baby gay 18-year-old who'd never written anything in his life and whose knowledge of the theater world was limited to the work of Candor and Ebb, sat in the middle of an overcrowded class of junior and senior playwrights having to share my opinions about one of the worst things I'd ever read up to that point, while also taking into account the full range of my classmates' personal experiences with the subject matter and being perfectly articulate so as to leave a good impression with my professor, who'd by that point been working as a theater critic and scholar for over 60 years. Yet not a great first impression, Davey. At the very least, it comforts me to say that Mamet is firmly in his flop era. He hasn't had a new play produced on Broadway since 2012 with The Anarchist, which sucked ass for basically all the same reasons as The Penitent. He's pretty much in the same place in his career now as Angel Lloyd Webber, just coasting off of his past successes while public opinion sways further and further from his favor. But while he may be flopping, that does not mean he's going silently. You know how every reactionary conservative stand-up comedian who made their careers making fun of women and gay people is now doing a sort of backslide, LARPing as the target of an oppressive, progressive mob? One of the main claims this kind of person makes is that they are simply being targeted for speaking the truth to what they perceive to be power. I find this phenomenon of entertainers confusing themselves for deep thinkers to be very interesting, and it's not just limited to shitbag hack stand-up comedians. Au contraire, the reactionary truth teller to alt-right fave pipeline is accessible to shitbag hacks of all walks of life. Y'all, I'm sweating so hard right now. I wanted to wear the beanie for the video, but I have to take it off. I'm so sorry. This is what I get for thinking like something looks cute on me. Like, I understand that it is 91 degrees out in New York in September, but it should not be this hot. I should be defrosting. All I want for Christmas is you right now, but instead I'm fucking boiling in my room because it is 91 degrees because CEOs don't know how to stop dumping in the ocean. Fuck. I don't know what it is about entertainers thinking that just because people like their plays about funny real estate agents doing duplicitous things to sell property to prospective buyers, suddenly they feel entitled to a platform to say whatever they want about whomever they choose, sans the consequences. You know, for all of his ills, Mamet was actually kind of onto something with his theories about the purpose of a play within the entertainment industry. While I disagree with him that a play's purpose is to make money rather than explore ideas or scenarios in an entertaining way, a philosophy philosophy he seems to have reneged on in recent years, if the Penitent is anything to go off of. I do have to give it to him that the playwright's job is not to be a great teller of unspoken truths, a voice for the silenced, standing up in the face of power and telling it how it is. At the end of the day, we are entertainers. While it's great to explore ideas and themes in your play or infuse them with political commentary, when it really comes down to it, if it's not entertaining, no one is going to listen to you. For as dog water as his plays are, I don't think people were wrong to be entertained by them back when Mamet had any interest in creating something compelling. I don't think it's a coincidence that this far-right heel turn came 30 years into Mamet's career. Well after he had exhausted the last of his creativity, Mamet had been working in the theater industry since the 1970s, and as tastes changed and audiences moved away from Mamet's style that by the 2000s was evidently beginning to stale, I can imagine him becoming a bit frustrated. It's clear, reading his newer work, that he has a real reluctance to adapt or grow as a writer. This is not unrelated to his conservative politics. After all, one of the core tenets of conservatism is an aversion to change. It's an extremely immature impulse, in my opinion, to see progress happening right in front of your eyes and refuse to move. In this scenario, Mamet is essentially a defiant child who hasn't yet learned the value of change or the inevitability of growth or progress on a macro scale. It's like that scene in Barbie where America Ferrera helps Barbie through her existential crisis. It's gonna take Ugly Betty to get through to this guy is what I'm saying. Maybe he just needs a spanking. Bend over, Davy. It's pretty clear by this point that conservative art across the board sucks. Conservatives are fundamentally inept at art making because they misunderstand art's purpose, which is more than just to make money, David. I think the late, great Nina Simone put it best when she said,
"An artist's duty, as far as I'm concerned, is to reflect the times." I think that is true of painters, sculptors, poets, musicians. As far as I'm concerned, it's their choice. But I choose to reflect the times and the situations in which I find myself. That to me is my duty. And at this crucial time in our lives, when everything is so desperate, when every day is a matter of survival, I don't think you can help but be involved. Young people, black and white, know this. That's why they're so involved in politics. We will shape and mold this country, or it will not be molded and shaped at all anymore. So I don't think you have a choice. How can you be an artist and not reflect the times? That to me is the definition of an artist.
And conservatives often think they are reflecting the times when they create works that seek to uphold the status quo and validate people's worst impulses. What they fail to understand, however, what they resist understanding, is that they are not reflecting the times in which they live. By seeking to uphold the status quo, they are reflecting a time in which the status quo went unchallenged. This, of course, is a fallacy because for as long as there has been an oppressive power structure, there have been people on the margins fighting for liberation. As such, the times these conservatives are reflecting exist only in their memory or their imaginations. Back when the oppressed were so marginalized that they didn't have to see, hear, or think about them. It's fighting in defense of a time that never existed. And it's so removed from reality that they have to do these twisted mental gymnastics in order to validate their own worldview. Mamet has to physically construct realities in which a gay man would commit mass murder and then cry homophobia at his psychiatrist as the reason for his actions.
It's just malicious, just gay faggotry that I just was not thinking we were going to run into.
In Race, he has to construct a reality where a black woman would falsely accuse a man of rape and racist abuse in order to extort money from him in order to validate his worldview about how men are the real victims and everyone's out to steal all their gold. I don't have to explain why this is ridiculous, right? These things speak for themselves. And every now and again, a think piece will drop on some fringe website where the author whinges on and on about how people are being unfair to poor old millionaire David Mamet and cancel culturing him for the crime of sucking. And Broadway World will repost it, and everyone once again has to discourse about this guy rather than allowing him to fade into obscurity, forgotten if not for a handful of popular plays from 4 decades ago. Thus, the cycle repeats. Meanwhile, Mamet's capital keeps growing larger and larger as producers see the controversy as an opportunity to revive one of his 3 plays that people actually like. I got the idea for this video after coming across a clip from the Young Turks responding to Mamet's now infamous Fox News interview.
Right-wing playwright David Mamet went on Fox News to continue smearing educators, continue making false accusations of pedophilia and grooming kids.
This is a bit of an old clip by now. I believe it was produced prior to Anna Kasparian's descent into transphobic grifterhood. In school, we spent a fair amount of time discussing Mamet and his work, and let's just say that the tone of those discussions was rarely positive. It is heartening to see that people in the theater industry, older and younger generations alike, seem to have wised up to the grumbling old man that Mamet has become. Even his earlier work is being discussed differently. I mentioned reading Oleana for a class in my first semester, so it's worth noting that people hated it. I think the only people that spoke highly of the play were our professor and this one dude who is known for being pretty all over the place in his own way. You know, straight men in theater. Takes all kinds. This prolonged moment of mask off has been valuable in exposing the hack that is David Mamet. As far as the theater world is concerned, this guy is finished, and he has been for a long time now. And while he will occasionally strong-arm the Atlantic into producing his latest collection of words, the writing is very much on the wall. His last critical success was in 2009, and even then the reviews were pretty mixed. And ever since then, everything he's written has done poorly with everyone who can reliably prove where they were on January 6th. If you feel I've been too harsh on Mamet or his work in this video, I invite you to rewatch that Fox News interview where he insinuates that all queer teachers, especially the men, are pedophiles.
But they're abusing them mentally and using sex to do so. This has always been the problem with education, is that teachers are inclined, particularly men, because men are predators, to pedophilia.
Whenever a conservative makes a fuss about an entire group of people being pedos or groomers or whatever, it always feels like projection on their part. Mamet claiming that all men are predators is a crazy self-report, and it makes me concerned for all the children and former children in his life. I would love to just write this guy off and move on with my life. Unfortunately, however, he's still writing, and because his name still holds weight, his new play, Henry Johnson, is set to go up in LA later this year. Apparently Shia LaBeouf is attached to the star, so it's good to see the entertainment industry's long, proud tradition of horrible men supporting horrible men still going strong. So long as this man has a platform and producers are still giving him money and he's still being invited on right-wing podcasts for interviews, his name and his influence will never die. So what do? Despite his continued relevance, at least his reputation is where it belongs in the gutter. Personally, I would love to go the rest of my life without reading another single one of his plays, in part just because I had to read so many of them for school. I just don't get anything out of reading them. Like, I actually feel like a worse writer for having read this play. I'm gonna have to do something really extreme to undo the psychic damage that reading this play has caused me. I'm thinking McDonough. I think that'll do the trick. Man, McDonough really is everything people thought David Mamet was back in the day, huh? His plays are violent and absurd, yes, but they also have substance and heart, and they are so much better constructed than Mamet's. It is unbelievable. Like, seriously, The Cripple of Anishman is like a perfect play. It is a perfect play from a technical perspective. If you're looking to get into theater, or you're just looking for something to read, or watch if you have the opportunity, you will get more out of one of Martin McDonagh's plays, any of his plays, than you will out of 10 of Mamet's. McDonagh's actually been a very big inspiration for me as a writer, if you couldn't tell. So I'm always happy to share some Martin love wherever I can. Phoebe Waller-Bridge married the man, okay? Clearly he's got something going on. I know I've savaged Mamet pretty hard in this video, so I think it's only fair that I put my own work out there in the same way that he has. One of my plays is already up on my YouTube channel. One of these. So go watch that and then read this and then tell me which one you hated more. While you're over there, be sure to subscribe. I spent a bulk of the summer traveling, so now I'm just like now getting back into the groove of making videos. Now that I'm not in school, I have a lot more mental real estate to dedicate to these projects. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. My videos are unscheduled, but I'm gonna try and up the, you know, output. Frequency by a bit. If you are a David Mamet fan, be sure to rip me to shreds in the comments. I promise to internalize them all and use them to inform my continued presence on this platform. Buy my silence is basically what I'm saying here. Between this video and the next one, I'll set a price, and all of you David Mamet fans, all 10 of you that remain, can band together and buy my silence permanently. It'll be just like that episode of Hacks, you know the one.
When will you just stop? Seriously. What will it take to make you just stop?
69 million. Right?
Yeah. Man, he's clever. Well, no, I'm not going to do that. But how about 1.69 million?
Anyways, bye.